Sup, I'm Yurigo, and today we'll be discussing my Dreamweaver soundtrack. More specifically, how I went about creating this soundtrack. As I gave myself a lot of restrictions, only 9 players, only one leitmotif, but more specifically, and the actual topic of this video, no percussion. So firstly, what is percussion used for? And now for reference, I'm not talking about pitched percussion, such as xylophones or glockenspiels or piano or harp. I'm talking more about the percussion we use for rhythm. We're talking about drums and cymbals and triangles and shakers and things like that. You could say the non-pitch percussion. As this kind of percussion really only has 3 roles in music that they can actually do: accents, rhythm, and ambience. We're not going to talk about ambience because that's just like and like a gong lightly rolled to create some like atmosphere. We're not going to be talking about that because it's not a big part of music. It doesn't happen in a lot of tracks, and it's in many ways more effective on other instruments anyway. Which is not the case for rhythms and accents. There is no other instrument that is better at doing these things than unpitched percussion. For all intensive purposes, accents are going to be transitions, impacts, and the little things like the cymbal in this. But we're not going to be talking about that last one because it's something that you can quite simply do on other instruments, and again, doesn't turn up in all tracks and isn't really complicated. As for rhythm, rhythm is just the beat, and percussion is the best at getting across the beat. The beat is almost always made up of what's called rhythmic subdivisions, where the 4/4, 3/4, 7/8, 16/32 bar is being broken up into little pulses. In 4/4 rock music, the beat is almost always broken up into 4 one-beat pulses. But we can break up the pulse however we like. A very standard subdivision of 4/4 music, especially in orchestral music, is the 2/3/3 or the 3/2/2 subdivision. You don't have to stick to these. You can subdivide however you want, and your subdivisions don't even have to stay within one bar. The hemiola pattern is the backbone of romantic and classical 6/8 subdivisions, and that happens over 2 bars as a 3/3/2/2/2 subdivision. So with that theory part over, now how did I get across the beat? One way is to break your accompaniment up into phrases. So I phrase my accompaniment here in Shame into that hemiola pattern, the 3/3/2/2/2. And here in the main theme, standard waltz, the just 1, 2, 3, but a strong accent on the 1 in the accompaniment to really phrase where that phrases are, rhythmic phrases. And the reason that we're doing this is because this way it doesn't really matter what the melody is doing. The accompaniment is taking care of the beat. And for those of you who are like, oh, but I always make the accompaniment do the beat. Well, you shouldn't. Firstly, you can, it's good, it works, I'm no stranger to it either, but you can be very effective by having the rhythmic part and the accompaniment part different. For example, so another way to really accent where that rhythm is without using percussion is to put stabs on the pulse. So I use some other instruments in this track for the xylophone, the bass clarinet, for example, just to hit at the start of every one of these subdivisions to make it really distinct where the pulse was. Now, the strings are also accenting it, but they're playing this other galloping rhythm in between, but they very clearly put an accent at the start of each pulse hit. And thirdly, the sharp transient instruments or just techniques. So percussion was never as big a thing as it was nowadays. even as late as the Romantic period, where it very closely resembles modern day soundtrack scoring and such, we didn't see anywhere near as much percussion as modern day media scores. And the reason we use it so much is because, again, drums have such a distinct transient hit, so it's very clear what your pulse is. And so we can mimic this to some extent by using instruments a little more non-conventionally. The three main ways I did this was Collegno, Bartok picks, and then an overblown wind instrument. Collegno is when you strike the strings with the back of the bow, the wooden part, instead of the horsehair part. It's easily the most effective of the three. Keep in mind that this technique sounds a bit creepy when you do it on the violin or the viola or just in the high register in general. But when you use it, the low notes of the cello and the double bass with a lot of force, you get this quite percussive sound. That conveniently is also the pitch of where you want the rhythm to be at. Bartok picks is one that I used often a lot. Similarly to a pizzicato, where they're plucking the string with their finger instead of with the bow. The difference is the Bartok picks is they pull the string up heaps hard, so when they let go, it slaps into the neck. Again, yes, this works on all string instruments, but this works the best, especially to get that percussive sound, when it's done on low strings, or at least low tension strings. And finally, the overblown winds. So normally overblowing winds makes a note that's very harmonic, full, and very airy. But if you do a really short note and you drench it in reverb, you get this cool like impact sound. This other one is compositional effect. So you'll notice that in some tracks, most of them actually, the melody is quite long and held. And this was done intentionally as to not clash with the accompaniment or to not overrun what the accompaniment was trying to do. If you listen to this part in Shame, the melody is sitting nice and soft over the top, very clearly in another register too, so it doesn't clash with the accompaniment. So you can very clearly hear the pulse underneath, and then the melody sits on top. You needn't do on top, you can do underneath or something, but you don't want to have too much overlap, is all I'm trying to say. And now for accents. So the first part of accents is transitions. All we're trying to do here is mimic what we would normally do on a cymbal roll, for example. So a few of the ways that I used was gliss, for example. And gliss also I'm going to include scale runs. Even though they're not technically glissando, it's still a scale run. Other times we would trill with a crescendo. And the trill itself doesn't really do much. But the same way that the crescendo itself doesn't really do much to leading into a new section. But when we add them both together, it really works in tandem. And then finally, the high impact sounds at the start of the section. Just to be very clear, we've moved into the next part. Again, a bit like hitting a cymbal or a gong or something. So some of the ways that I used was the tubular bells here in Envy's Domain. We use those overblown winds again from the start. You'll hear also there was the Bartok picks in there and lots of collegno and stuff too. In this one, we've got a couple different parts. One part, we're using the gliss. And later, we're just hitting like a bowl instrument thing. I don't really know what it is. Bowl, it says. Next, again, we've got some compositional effects. So you can either create a pause in the music, which is naturally going to grow tension, because it leaves the listener trying to wonder what is going to happen next, such as here. And there's also like a rhythmic build. So this kind of works in the same way that a drum fill works, or in my head anyway, where the drum fill is kind of like, it feels like it wants to go somewhere because you hear this rhythm repeating or clearly moving towards something. So you don't actually need to do like a fast thing like a fill. It works as simple as just like 2, 3, 4 into the next part kind of thing. We see this here in like Aria the Dreamweaver. And then we also see it here in Paranoia Surveillance. Well, there you go. That wasn't everything I did. That was just the main points, and I think the ones that really carried it. Thanks for listening. Go listen to the soundtrack. It's been out for almost a year now. I hope this brought you a little insight into some knowledge that you can use in your compositions. Even if you are using percussion, you can still use these in there too. And if it was helpful, like and subscribe, and have a great week.